Well, this is CBS2 News at 5. We begin with breaking news, an end of a pursuit for a DUI driver.
Stu Mandel's over the scene in Sky 2 with details. Stu.
Well, it came to an end out here mid-cities. This is going to be La Brea, right at the corner of Adams, just south of the 10 freeway. As you said, it was a pursuit, DUI suspect or impaired driver. Not really sure, but we do know they were in pursuit, went into tracking mode, and the helicopter followed it for some time till it got off the freeway. Officers from LAPD were close by when the vehicle did pull over. That suspect now in custody. Nobody's been hurt. No crashes to report. Live in Sky 2 over the mid-cities area, I'm Stu Mandel. Back to you two in the studio.
All right, Stu, thank you. Signed, sealed, delivered. With the stroke of his pen, President Trump puts a temporary halt to the separation of children and immigrant parents who come to the border illegally. But the key word tonight is temporary.
That's right. The president's action today still calls on Congress for a permanent solution. CBS2 political reporter Dave Bryant is here now with a closer look at what that executive order does and doesn't do, Dave.
Yeah, it was getting a little too hot in that kitchen for the president.
Sure.
He decided, I need to cool things down and sign this executive order. With the pressure growing from almost every conceivable direction, including some of his own family members, President Trump caved into that pressure and signed an executive order he says will address the family separation problem.
It's about keeping families together while at the same time being sure that we have a very powerful, very strong border.
A day after meeting with GOP congressional leaders and reported pressure from First Lady Melania Trump and First Daughter Ivanka Trump, along with an escalating national uproar, the president reversed course on his policy of separating children from parents who illegally cross the border.
No, Ivanka feels very strongly. My wife feels very strongly about it. I feel very strongly about it. I think anybody with a heart would feel very strongly about it. We don't like to see families separated.
So here's what the executive order does. Allows families to be held together for 20 days. After that, they must either be deported or separated. That means Congress still has to act. Republican leaders are now considering two bills. The measure would keep children under the age of 18 with their families in residential centers during legal proceedings. It would also order that those facilities be secure and safe. The bill would separate children from adults who are not their parents or have a serious criminal record. But according to Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of Manhattan Beach, the president's order doesn't fix the problem.
There are a number of ways to solve the family separation issue. Donald Trump picked one of the worst ways, which is to try to reverse an actual court settlement. In this case, what they could do is, after 20 days, let the family go and have them come back for the court hearing.
But what about the more than 2,300 children currently sitting in centers away from their parents? Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar told the Washington Post his agency will start reuniting them, but made no specific commitment on how quickly that can be accomplished. Now, tomorrow, the House of Representatives is scheduled to vote on those two wide-ranging immigration reform bills, both of which would also provide $25 billion to build President Trump's wall at the Mexican border. Many Republicans argue the bills would also provide a permanent solution to the separation of children from their parents who are detained at the border. But Democrats, of course, well, they disagree. Susie, back to you.
All right, Dave, thank you very much for that. Now, with thousands of kids and parents separated and sent to holding facilities all over the country, how is the government going to get these families reunited? We go live to San Diego County for that part of the story coming up in our second half hour.
And in California here, the immigration battle was fought over the fate of sanctuary cities. Take a look.
No man, no wall, sanctuary for all.
Demonstrators rallied outside a Sacramento courthouse while attorneys argued inside. Trump administration wants 3 California laws protecting undocumented immigrants from federal agents tossed out. Sacramento Mayor Darrell Steinberg, who joined demonstrators today, says what's happening here and at the border could be a game changer.
We resist what's happening in this courthouse today, where the Trump administration is seeking to overturn some of our laws that protect dreamers, hardworking families. When you connect it to what's happening at the border today, Trump has finally tripped a wire.
Some of the president's supporters clashed with demonstrators, and so far no reports of any arrests.
Tonight, we're learning disturbing new details about the Perris couple accused of imprisoning and starving their 13 children. Today, prosecutors are making their case in front of a judge. And CBS 2's Nicole Comstock is live outside court in Riverside with today's dramatic testimony. Nicole?
Yeah, today's hearing was all about finding out whether or not there was even enough evidence for the Turpins to stand trial. We certainly heard about a lot of evidence in court today, and most recently, just a couple of moments ago, probably the most disturbing thing we saw was a photograph of one of the Turpin daughters, a 14-year-old girl who looked much more like a 6 or 7-year-old girl who had shackles around her wrists. That was a moment where people in court gasped, and really the first time in this courthouse today we saw her parents have an emotional reaction where they looked like they were wiping tears away for just a moment. Most of the day, though, it seemed like they were staring straight forward, didn't have any sort of expression on their faces as they heard a harrowing 911 call from their 17-year-old daughter on the day she escaped their home in Perris back in January. Now, investigators also had some testimony about their first interviews with the children, saying that some of the siblings acted as hall monitors throughout the years inside their home so that other siblings wouldn't take candy or food from either their mother's room or from the kitchen. Now, they also said that one of the Turpin boys told investigators that he was first being tied up with ropes, but at some point he figured out that he could chew his way out of those ropes. And instead of the situation getting any better, he told investigators they started using chains to tie him up so that he couldn't get away. Now, the prosecution also showed some photographs of the children with filthy skin and filthy clothing, and that included them having underwear that were heavily soiled in feces. There was also a good amount of time spent on accusations of sexual abuse against David Turpin, where one of the daughters said that he pulled her pants down in an upstairs room one time and put her on his lap. So that was another really emotional moment for the courtroom. But we'll have much more coming up tonight on CBS 2 News at 6. For now, we're reporting live in Riverside. Nicole Comstock, CBS 2.
LAPD officer accused of killing a family of 3 pleaded not guilty today to murder and DUI charges. Prosecutors say 27-year-old Edgar Verduzco was speeding on the southbound 605 in Whittier last September. We're told he rear-ended 2 cars. One burst into flames. 3 members of the Davila family died in that burning vehicle.
A police chase ended with a crash and a cloud of smoke on the 110 freeway today. Police were hot on the tail of a suspected DUI driver when he slammed into a pickup truck. The driver kept gunning the gas, trying to get away, but all he did was create a huge cloud of smoke, as you see there. Now, all lanes of the 110 in South LA were shut down while the driver was arrested.
Now to this disturbing video of a deadly officer-involved shooting last month that was just released by the LAPD. The release is a first for this department, but some are not too happy about how LAPD went about releasing this video. CBS 2's Amy Johnson is live outside of police headquarters at this hour in downtown with more on the story. Amy?
Well, you know, people that we spoke with say they are happy that the department is releasing the videos for these critical incidents, but many say they don't like how they're being released, calling this first one a produced and slanted documentary that only shows a small part of what really happened.
Hey, stay right there, bud. Stay right there.
This is video of the interaction between the LAPD and Jose Chavez, edited and released by the LAPD within 45 days as part of the department's first critical incident video release.
What you will see from these presentations is policing at its rawest.
It was May 6 when officers responded to a 911 call of a prowler. Police say Chavez refused to comply, and officers are captured on video firing beanbags and tasers.
Taser.
And then handcuffing the 24-year-old who had difficulty breathing and died at the hospital. The released video is 17 minutes long, although Chief Charlie Beck says there's about 50 hours of officer body cam and their vehicle video of the 2-hour standoff.
The entirety will not be released.
Chief Beck says they are releasing what he and the police commission would use to make their decisions.
The release of all the video is, particularly at this point, will not tell the whole story. I think that you have to release it in context, and that's what we do.
If the department wants to communicate with the public by releasing an edited video that explains the incident, they should be free to do that.
Peter Biebring is the director of police practice for the ACLU.
By not giving us the full picture, the full video, LAPD allows doubts to persist about what happened on that incident, and that undercuts the very purpose of the video release policy.
Chavez does not comply with
the production also includes commentary from officers and Chavez's criminal history.
I think there's another reason to be concerned that the video released is a public relations effort, is that they identify Chavez's criminal record when there's no reason to think that had any bearing on the incident, and that seems calculated solely to justify use of force.
The Chavez family is suing the LAPD. Their attorney released a statement that reads in part, "While we appreciate the attempt at transparency by the Los Angeles Police Department, this highly produced video is heavily edited and slanted in favor of the LAPD and still leaves many questions unanswered." And the LAPD tells us that they are still waiting for the autopsy and toxicology reports to determine exactly how Chavez died. I'll send it back to you in the studio.
All right, Amy, thank you.
Orange County DA's office released its report today on the shooting death of U.S. Army veteran by Tustin police. DA says the Tustin officers were justified in shooting Edwin Fuentes. A 25-year-old was killed after his wife called 911 last year to say that he was suicidal. Officers found Fuentes in his car. They say that they tried to negotiate with him. They say that he threatened to kill himself, then pointed his gun towards officers. And that's when police shot him.
Officer Carter, as a matter of fact, did his job reasonably and based on the circumstances in a lawful manner. Therefore, there is no evidence to support the filing of any criminal charges, and at this time, the Orange County District Attorney will close its inquiry into this matter.
The DA says Fuentes was suffering from PTSD after serving in Afghanistan. Now to some developing news in Lakeview Terrace, where Sky 2 was over a grass fire where wranglers released a stable of horses nearby to escape the flames. A fire crews raced to Foothill Boulevard near the 210 just after 1:30 today. We're told they got it under control in about 20 minutes, thankfully. No reports of injuries to people or animals.
Tonight, new developments in an attempted kidnapping caught on camera.
Yeah, police say the victim not only managed to save herself, she got the evidence police needed to make an arrest.
And murder mystery at a local mall. Who shot a man inside this car?
And that's one way to avoid tripping the motion detectors. Too bad this bad guy never looked up.
Hey everybody, I'm Garth Kemp. Wow, look at the beach, looking nice out there. Very hot inland, not quite as bad as we thought elsewhere. Tell you all about it coming up.